The Curse of Medusa's Gaze. The sky was a bruised purple, swollen with the promise of a storm that wouldn't come until long after we were buried in the earth. The air was thick and sour with the scent of decay, though nothing around us should have carried such a stench. The team had been digging for weeks now, carving away the layers of dust and dirt from what we thought was a forgotten temple in the hills of Thrace. Medusa's temple, or so the legend said, but no one believed in legends. At least not at first. We found the entrance on the 35th day. A narrow slit in the rock, just wide enough for a man to slip through if he was brave enough to crawl into the dark unknown. The walls of the passage were slick with damp, the kind that comes from things long buried, long forgotten. I still remember the first sound, a hiss, faint and echoing. I tried to brush it off as the wind, though it gnawed at my nerves, the way an itch festers just beneath the skin. I wanted to tell the others I heard it, but something held my tongue. We descended deeper into the bowels of the temple, flashlights flickering as if the darkness itself resisted the intrusion of light. The air was stagnant, colder than it should have been for a place sealed off from the world. We could hear water dripping somewhere, each drop like the ticking of a clock, counting down the minutes we had left. The first room we uncovered was vast, the walls etched with strange carvings, snakes coiled in intricate patterns, their heads raised as though they were waiting for something to happen. At the center of the room stood a statue of a woman, her face hidden beneath a veil, arms outstretched as if offering an embrace. The snakes seemed to writhe beneath the stone, their eyes gleaming as our flashlights passed over them. No one dared to touch it. One of us, a tall man who always seemed too eager to impress, too quick to scoff at the myths that surrounded this place, laughed and reached out to lift the veil. His fingers brushed the stone. It happened in an instant. He froze, mouth half open, a strangled sound lodged in his throat. His skin began to crack, hairline fractures spreading like spider webs across his face. His eyes, wide with terror, clouded over, turning gray, then white, then nothing at all. Before we could move, before we could scream, he was gone. Nothing but a statue, lifelike and grotesque in the dim light. No one moved. No one breathed. I heard the hiss again, louder now, closer. Something slithered in the darkness behind us. A shadow twisted in the corner of my vision, and I felt the air shift, heavy and oppressive. It was her. Medusa. I didn't need to see her to know. "Don't look," someone whispered, the words barely audible, strangled by panic. "For God's sake, don't look," panic tore through us. We stumbled back, tripping over loose stones and one another as we scrambled toward the exit. I could hear her, moving, the sound of scales dragging across the floor, inching closer. I could feel her eyes on my back, burning through the layers of stone and time that separated us. One of us screamed. I didn't turn. I didn't dare. I heard the familiar cracking sound again, that sickening crunch of flesh turning to stone. Then silence. No footsteps. No breathing. Just me and the sound of water dripping from some unseen crack in the ceiling. I stumbled forward, one hand on the wall, the rough stone biting into my palm. I didn't care. The only thought in my mind was survival. Get out. Don't look back. But the walls were closing in, the passageway growing narrower with each step, as though the temple itself was alive, squeezing me into a coffin of rock and dirt. Then I heard it again, the hiss, closer this time, a whisper against my neck. I ran. I ran faster than I ever thought possible, lungs burning, legs shaking, each breath a ragged gasp that echoed in the narrow passage. The walls seemed to twist, turning back on themselves, as if the temple was warping, changing as I fled. But I couldn't stop. The slithering sound behind me was growing louder, too close now, too real. I could feel her presence, the weight of her gaze pressing down on my spine, threatening to paralyze me if I even dared to look over my shoulder. The others, I don't know what happened to them. I didn't hear their footsteps anymore, just the hiss, the scrape of stone on stone, and the darkness that seemed to grow thicker, almost liquid in its suffocating blackness. My flashlight flickered, casting brief shadows across the uneven floor, and then went out completely. I stopped, gasping for air, forcing myself to listen. Nothing but silence, except for my heart pounding in my ears, loud and frantic. My legs trembled, every instinct screaming at me to keep moving, to find a way out of this cursed place. But I couldn't see. I could only feel the rough stone beneath my hands, the cold air clinging to my skin, the slow, deliberate pulse of something ancient and malevolent waiting in the dark. I heard the whisper again. It wasn't words, at least not in any language I knew, but something more primal. A sound that vibrated deep in my chest, crawling under my skin like 1,000 tiny insects. My muscles tensed, my breath caught in my throat. She was close, so close I could feel the cold presence of her breath. A flicker of movement caught my eye, barely perceptible in the corner of my vision, but it was there. Something was moving toward me. I froze, every nerve in my body screaming for me to run, but I couldn't. Not this time. I had to be smart. I couldn't look. Instead, I focused on the wall, tracing the jagged lines of the stone with my fingers, following its rough texture as I tried to map out a way forward in the blackness. The slithering sound grew louder, the cold air thickening, pressing in on me. I could almost feel her eyes on me, waiting for that one moment of weakness, that one mistake that would seal my fate. The air shifted, a sudden gust like a breath down my neck, and then I heard it, a scraping noise, a dragging like nails across stone. I wasn't alone. I couldn't scream, couldn't move. My body felt heavy, rooted in place. But I heard it, footsteps. Slow, deliberate, not mine. Someone, or something, was in the passage with me. My heart thundered in my chest, fear locking me in place. Then, without warning, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I gasped, jerking away instinctively, but as I twisted, the flashlight I had forgotten I was gripping flickered back to life, casting a brief, sputtering glow across the narrow tunnel. In that split second, I saw a face, twisted, frozen in terror, eyes wide and sightless. One of the others. But they were no longer human. Their skin was gray, cracked like old stone, their mouth open in a silent scream. I staggered back, the light flickering out again, plunging me back into the suffocating dark. My pulse roared in my ears, adrenaline coursing through my veins as I stumbled away from the statue. But I wasn't fast enough. Another sound. Closer this time. A whisper, barely audible but sharp enough to cut through the thick air around me. A name. My name. My blood turned cold. I hadn't told anyone in the group my real name. Not one of them. But it knew. Panic surged, and I started running again, my footsteps echoing in the labyrinth of stone, my mind racing, searching for an explanation. The passage twisted and turned, narrowing until I had to squeeze my way through, scraping my arms and legs on the jagged walls. I could feel the weight of the curse pressing down on me with each step. Then out of nowhere I hit something solid, another dead end. My fingers clawed at the stone in desperation. I was trapped. I could feel the cold air thickening again, the oppressive darkness weighing on my chest, making it hard to breathe. I pressed myself against the wall, listening, waiting. And then I heard it. Not a hiss, not a whisper, but breathing, slow, measured. Right behind me, my throat tightened. I could feel the breath on my neck, icy and deliberate. I squeezed my eyes shut, every muscle in my body tensed, bracing for what was coming next. The breathing grew louder, almost rhythmic, like something savoring the fear that pulsed through me, and then, silence. The air shifted. Cold fingers brushed against my arm. I opened my eyes and looked. I shouldn't have opened my eyes. For a moment, I was paralyzed, eyes locked in place, breath caught in my throat. She was there. Not a statue. Not a myth. Medusa. Her face was inhuman, a sickening blend of beauty and grotesque horror. Her skin was pale, almost translucent, and her eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, a deep, burning amber. And her hair, oh God, her hair was alive. Snakes, dozens of them, slithering in all directions, their fangs glistening with venom. I should have been turned to stone. That's what all the legends said. But something was wrong. I could feel my body trembling, but I wasn't frozen. I wasn't being pulled into that eternal, petrified stillness like the others. Her eyes bore into mine, and yet I could still move, still think, still run. My body screamed at me to tear my gaze away, but I was caught in the horror of the moment, the realization that I was face to face with the creature that had been stalking us. My heart raced, my mind whirring with the impossible. How was I still here? How was I still alive? Then she spoke. Her voice was a whisper, a hissing sound that seemed to echo off the stone walls, but her lips didn't move. The snakes that writhed on her head seemed to twitch in unison as her voice filled the space between us. You're different. Those words cut through me like a knife. My breath hitched and I stumbled back, my body breaking free from the trance as my instincts kicked in. Without another thought, I turned and bolted into the passage behind me, her voice chasing after me, those hissing whispers that sank into my mind like hooks. You can't escape, you never will. The passageway twisted and turned, my flashlight flickering in and out, but I didn't stop. The walls seemed to close in around me, the air growing colder, heavier, as if I was being pulled deeper into the earth, into the very heart of the curse. I could hear something slithering behind me, fast, too fast. The ground beneath me was uneven, the floor slick with moisture, and my foot caught on something, a loose stone or a root, and I went down hard. My knees hit the floor with a sickening thud, pain shooting up my legs. I tried to push myself up, but before I could, I felt it. A hand on my ankle. My skin prickled, my blood turning to ice. Slowly I turned, terrified of what I would see. It wasn't Medusa. It was one of them. One of the others, the one who had disappeared first. His face was twisted in agony, half his body already encased in stone, but his eyes, they were still alive, still full of terror. His mouth moved, but no sound came out, just that same desperate expression, as though he was trying to scream for help but had no voice left. I yanked my foot free, scrambling back. His fingers cracked as they shattered, pieces of stone breaking away from him as he reached out, trying to grab hold of me again. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. My flashlight flickered out once more, plunging me into darkness. But this time I didn't need it. There was a faint light ahead, a sickly green glow that pulsed at the end of the tunnel. An exit, maybe? A way out? I didn't care. I just needed to get away from her, from them. I ran toward the light, ignoring the burning in my legs, the sharp pain in my side. The whispers followed me, her voice curling around my thoughts, wrapping them in fear. She was toying with me, that much I knew. I burst into the light, stumbling into a vast chamber, larger than anything we had uncovered before. The ceiling soared above me, disappearing into darkness, and at the center of the room was a large stone altar. Surrounding it were statues, dozens of them, all frozen in various states of terror. Some were reaching out, others were cowering, but their faces were all twisted in the same silent scream. The air was thick with dread, the scent of decay and dust filling my lungs as I gasped for breath. My mind was spinning, trying to make sense of it all, but the one thing I couldn't shake was the feeling of being watched. I approached the altar, my steps slow and cautious, every nerve in my body on edge. There was something lying on top of it, something wrapped in cloth, ancient and crumbling. It looked like a book, a ledger or a journal. My hands shook as I reached out and brushed the dust away, revealing a worn leather cover. The title, barely legible, sent a chill through my spine. The Eyes of the Dead. I didn't want to open it. I knew whatever was inside would bring answers I wasn't ready for, but I couldn't stop myself. My fingers moved on their own, flipping the brittle pages, and as I scanned the cramped, handwritten text, a sense of creeping horror washed over me. It wasn't a journal. It was a list. A list of names. Hundreds of names. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the last entry. My name, written in red ink. The moment I read it, the whispers stopped. The slithering behind me ceased. And I realized with a bone-chilling certainty, she had been expecting me all along. I stood there staring at the page, my mind spinning. My name, written in blood-red ink, as if it had been etched into fate long before I ever set foot in this cursed place. It didn't make sense. How could she have known? How could any of this be real? The chamber was silent now, the only sound my shallow breathing as I struggled to make sense of the horror before me. The statues, frozen in their eternal agony, seemed to watch me, their stone eyes full of dread. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was next, that soon I'd join them in their silent, petrified nightmare. But why hadn't I turned to stone? Why was I still here, still breathing, when the others had been taken so easily? I clutched the book tighter, my hands shaking. I needed answers. There had to be something in these pages, something that would explain why she had spared me. But the writing was old, faded, the words barely legible. I flipped through the pages, faster and faster, desperation clawing at my throat, and then I saw it. A single word, scrawled over and over again in the margins, growing more frantic with each repetition. Riddles. The air grew colder as the word burned itself into my mind, and I suddenly understood. The legends had always said that Medusa didn't just turn people to stone, she played with them. She toyed with their minds, setting traps, laying puzzles before them, waiting to see if they could solve her cruel games before she claimed them. And now it was my turn. I heard it then, a low, raspy whisper that seemed to come from the walls themselves, echoing in the vast chamber. It wasn't her voice, not like before. This was something different, something older. The riddles had begun. What has eyes yet cannot see? What is present in darkness but absent in light? The voice slithered through my mind, twisting my thoughts. My pulse quickened, my breath shallow as the words looped again and again, pressing in on me from every angle. It was like a riddle from childhood, but the stakes were so much higher now. A wrong answer wouldn't just mean failure, it would mean death. My eyes darted around the chamber, searching for clues. The statues, the altar, the snakes carved into the walls, everything felt like part of some larger puzzle, some ancient game designed to trap me in her web. The room itself seemed to pulse with an unspoken malice, daring me to make the first move. And then it hit me, the statues. They were all frozen in terror, their eyes wide open, seeing, but not seeing. Eyes that could not see. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine as I whispered the answer aloud, the words barely leaving my lips. A statue. The room responded immediately. A deep rumble vibrated through the stone floor, and I felt the walls tremble as if the entire temple was shifting, groaning under the weight of something ancient and malevolent. But the riddle wasn't over. What is present in darkness but absent in light? The voice coiled tighter around me, squeezing my chest until it felt like I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, but the answer eluded me. The light from the altar flickered, casting long, twisted shadows on the walls. Shadows. Of course. I spoke the word aloud, feeling a cold dread settle into my bones as the room fell silent once again. A shadow. The ground beneath me lurched, and the air filled with the sound of stone grinding against stone. I turned, just in time to see a door opening at the far end of the chamber, the heavy slab of rock sliding away to reveal a staircase spiraling down into deeper darkness. My legs felt like lead, but I knew I had no choice. The only way out was forward. With the book still clutched in my hand, I stepped toward the stairs, each step echoing in the cold silence of the temple. My heart pounded, every muscle in my body tense with the knowledge that she was still watching, still waiting for me to make a mistake. The stairs seemed to go on forever, winding deeper and deeper into the earth, the air growing colder and more oppressive with each step. I could feel something following me, just out of sight, its presence like a weight pressing down on my back. But I didn't look. I couldn't. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in another chamber, smaller, but even more oppressive than the last. The walls were lined with mirrors, each one reflecting distorted images of myself. In the center of the room was another altar, but this one was different. This one held a single item, carefully placed in the middle of the stone slab. A mask. It was a strange, ancient thing made of smooth, polished stone, with no features, no eyes, no mouth, just a blank, expressionless face. And then I understood. Medusa wanted me to wear it. I stepped closer, my mind racing. The riddles, the games, they were leading me here. The mask wasn't just a piece of stone. It was a way to protect myself, a way to hide from her gaze. But there was something wrong, something twisted about it. I could feel the malice radiating from it, the way it seemed to pulse with the same dark energy that filled the temple. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the mask, every instinct screaming at me not to put it on. But I had no choice. If I wanted to survive, if I wanted to escape, I had to play her game. With trembling fingers, I lifted the mask and placed it over my face. The moment it touched my skin, everything went cold. My vision blurred, the world around me twisting and warping until I could no longer tell what was real. The mirrors in the room flickered, showing me faces that weren't mine. Faces of the dead, twisted in agony, their mouths open in silent screams. And then I saw her, Medusa. She was standing behind me, her reflection in the mirror distorted and monstrous, her eyes burning with that same terrible light. But she couldn't see me, not with the mask. I was hidden from her, shielded from her gaze. Or so I thought. Because as I stared into the mirror, something horrifying became clear. The mask wasn't hiding me from her. It was turning me into her. I stood frozen in front of the mirror, the weight of the stone mask pressing into my face. The air had gone cold, so cold that it hurt to breathe, each inhalation like shards of ice cutting into my lungs. But it wasn't the cold that terrified me. It was what I saw in the reflection. It was me, or at least it had been. Now the face staring back at me was twisted, grotesque, something inhuman. The skin, once warm and flushed with life, had grown pale and stone-like, the veins beneath the surface blackened and dead. The eyes, my eyes, were hollow, glowing faintly in the dim light like dying embers. And the hair... God, the hair. It wasn't hair anymore. It writhed and slithered, hissing softly. Snakes. Just like hers. I wanted to tear the mask off, to rip it away and run, anything to stop the transformation I could feel creeping through my body, twisting me into something I didn't recognize. But when I reached for it, my fingers wouldn't obey. They hovered inches from the stone, trembling in the cold air. My body refused to respond, as though the mask had already become a part of me, rooting itself deep beneath my skin. I was becoming her. I heard a faint hiss behind me, and my blood turned to ice. I didn't have to turn to know what was there. She was waiting, watching, the silent predator closing in on her prey. But there was something different this time, something I hadn't understood before. She wasn't hunting me, she was replacing me. The realization hit me like a hammer, my mind reeling as the pieces fell into place. The temple, the riddles, the statues, none of it had been a game. It had been a ritual. A dark, ancient ritual designed to pass on the curse. Every name written in that book had belonged to someone who had entered this place and faced her, thinking they could escape her gaze, survive her horrors. But they hadn't. None of them had. They had all been turned. The mask was the final piece, the last step in the ritual. It wasn't just a shield, it was a prison, a gateway through which she could move, shedding her old skin like a serpent, leaving the new wearer to take her place. The whispers returned, louder now, surrounding me on all sides, filling the air with a cacophony of voices. They were her victims. The ones who had come before, trapped in this eternal nightmare, their voices now part of the temple itself. I staggered back from the mirror, my legs weak, heart pounding so hard it felt like it would break through my chest. The room spun around me, and I fell to my knees, gasping for air that felt too thick, too heavy to breathe. "It's too late," her voice whispered, soft and cruel. "You are mine now, you've always been mine," I screamed. I screamed so loud it felt like my throat would tear, the sound bouncing off the stone walls and crashing back into me, but it didn't matter. Nothing could drown out the terror building inside me. I clawed at the mask, fingers scraping against the cold stone, but it wouldn't budge. It was as though it had fused to my skin, sinking deeper with every heartbeat, every breath, every second I remained in that cursed place. The chamber began to shift, the walls warping and twisting, and in the distorted mirrors I could see her. Moving closer, her form flickering like a shadow in the dim light. Her eyes, those terrible amber eyes, locked onto mine through the reflection, and a wave of nausea washed over me as I felt the last threads of my humanity slip away. I wasn't me anymore. I was her. The mask tightened, sealing itself against my flesh, and the transformation completed. My body went numb, the cold consuming every part of me until I could no longer feel the ground beneath my feet, no longer feel the blood coursing through my veins. My mind slipped into darkness, sinking into the abyss where she waited for me, pulling me deeper into the curse. And then everything stopped. The whispers, the hissing, the cold, all of it vanished in an instant, leaving behind a silence so profound it pressed in on me like a weight. I blinked, and the world came back into focus, clearer than before, sharper, as if I was seeing through new eyes. I looked at my hands, expecting to see skin and blood, but there was nothing there. Only stone. My fingers were cracked, hard, frozen in place. I had become the thing I feared most. In the mirrors, I saw her, standing where I had once stood, watching me with a faint, twisted smile. She had escaped. She was free. And I was the one trapped now, bound to this place for eternity. I tried to scream, to move, but I couldn't. My body was no longer mine. It was just another statue in her collection, another soul condemned to watch in silence as others fell into the same trap, over and over again. In the stillness, her voice echoed once more, soft and mocking, "There is always another." The final piece clicked into place, and I realized the horrifying truth. I wasn't the first, and I wouldn't be the last.